Hello, attendees. Can you hear me okay? I want to make sure the audio is working. The Q&A that I started the YouTube stream. If you go to Austin Tech Videos, or we'll figure out how to get the link posted, but usual place. I feel like there should be some music or something I could put on. I haven't quite figured out how to do that, but I don't want to get like a DMCA strike or anything. Copyright strike, whatever they're called. Yeah, 12 more minutes. People should start showing up here soon. Is the audio working? Hopefully my YouTube chat is going to work this month. Might have to get started a little bit later than normal this month. I think people are running a little behind. Hey, Bobby. Testing, testing. Hmm. Okay, good. Thanks for confirming that. I think we're going to get started a little bit later than normal. We're running a bit behind this month. It's been a busy week, I think. Just sit tight, be patient. Messages. Can't start my video. Maybe let me change to co-host. Try now, Bobby. You're not an attendee.
There we go.
Okay, cool. Allow
And when I
panelists
go to share my screen, it'll actually work.
Allow panelists to start video. Okay. I'll turn that permission on. And I will promote Ian.
Hey there.
Hello, hello. I think everybody's running a little late, so I think we'll get started a little bit later than normal.
Okay.
So you got some time.
All right.
I don't know how to play like music on here that wouldn't get us a copyright strike.
Yeah, let's not. All right. So let me move that over here. Nice thing about having 3 screens, which is apparently one more than you can do with the new ARM Max, is I can actually throw my speaker view on one screen, the actual presentation on another, and all of the Zoom stuff on a third.
It does sound handy.
Mm-hmm.
Are any of them like vertical
No.
oriented?
No, I've got two 24s and a 27, and all of them are horizontal. If I'm looking at a bunch of code or something like that, then it's always on the center screen.
Mhm.
And that's tall enough that I've never had a desire to go vertical with anything for quite a while. I used to run one vertical, but that was before I got the Mac before this one.
Ah.
And that was also a more square format. The like super widescreen vertical ones are just like crazy. All right. So I want to Slack. All right. I'm going to be right back.
Okay.
Do not unmute me.
Okay. Well, how's everybody doing? Somebody asked a question in the Q&A thing. If you want the link to the YouTube, so we can chat on the YouTube. But it looks like the join the webinar link continues to work fine. It even let me, like, as a host, join the same link, so that was cool. I had noticed previously, a few months ago, like, there was a different link for hosts than for attendees. So I was using the other link, but yeah, I was able to figure out, like, oh, you're a host. Can you see the other? So Nancy's asking, hi Nancy, can we see the other attendees in Zoom during the presentation? I don't know if you can see the attendee list, but we had problems early on with making everybody, the equivalent of a panelist, or allowing everybody to have full privileges. And so this is kind of the safest way to ensure that we have good quality content and whatnot. So I don't, you can see the list of people, but you can't. It's just going to be panelists and the speaker who are going to have, like, normal Zoom privileges. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm going to also put in the link to the YouTube. There's the link to the YouTube if everyone wants to chat while the presentation is going on. Thanks for asking a question. I can't post or type answers unless people ask stuff. I suppose I should turn on my video, huh? Yep, there we go. Video's working. We're in a star field this month. I saw on the DevOps thing earlier this week, somebody had the background from the Rudy Giuliani.
Four Seasons Total Landscaping.
Yeah, that was his background, his Zoom background. That was pretty awesome.
Yep. So I guess I could show, let's see here, 1 second. I need to take advantage of the fact that I have a brand new machine with a 1080p webcam built in.
You got a new Mac?
Yep, got it a few weeks back, and has 128 gigs of RAM. I've upgraded it all the way to as much as it can hold, which means I can run like Slack and Chrome simultaneously. It's crazy.
And the PHP Storm? And Docker?
The Storm ain't bad, actually. It only takes like a gig or two. If Storm is taking like 16 gigs of RAM, then your project needs to adopt microservices or something.
Yeah, Chrome is pretty bad. Safari. Well, I think Chris said he's taking care of some family stuff, so he'll be around in a few minutes. He'll be here in a few minutes. But maybe we should get started. What do you think, Bobby?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Are you so okay? Do you want to do your intro stuff first, and then I'll do intro Ian?
Sure.
Okay.
Hopefully Zoom will let me do it this time.
Oh, yeah, maybe I'll stop sharing. Oh, and then remind me to start recording too. Stop sharing. I assume you're ready to go in a couple minutes, Ian.
I'm ready now.
Okay.
You guys see my screen?
Yep.
All right, cool. I'm Bobby Cahill from Boston PHP. Thanks everyone for attending. This is MergePHP, which is a collaboration between Boston PHP, Austin PHP, and Atlanta PHP. I'm going to quickly run through the intro that I usually give when we have an in-person Boston PHP event, just to give you an idea of who we are and all that kind of stuff. So welcome. Boston PHP is located, our home base is in Meetup. So the link here, meetup.com/BostonPHP. We're also on Twitter @BostonPHP. We also have a private group on Facebook. It's private to prevent spam. So just like join the group and one of the admins will get notified, and we'll just, as long as you don't have like zero history or like really sketchy looking, if you don't look like a bot, basically we'll just immediately accept you. Same thing with LinkedIn. We have a private group on LinkedIn. We've been around since 2002, where a guy by the name of Mark started the group, and there was maybe 4 people meeting in like a library or a coffee shop, and it just grew over time, and now we're meeting in big spaces until the pandemic. But we've had about 275 meetups. A small chunk of those, probably I would guess like 50-ish, were virtual self-study groups, events, but the rest of them are like actual Boston PHP events. I'll mention the virtual self-study thing later. We have close to 38. We have over 3,800 members. We used to be the largest tech-based meetup group in New England. I have no idea if that's still true. There's so many groups now. Our focus is on education, and education as in like learning how to program, that kind of thing. Idea sharing, which is, if you have a cool idea or something interesting you've learned or something you want to demo, you always let us know and we'll be happy to schedule you in for a talk. So you could share your ideas. And then we're looking for ways to promote participation in the open source community. So we're looking for ideas. If you want to suggest any ideas, we're talking about possibly doing something like a Hacktoberfest event, except we don't want to wait till next October. We may do that through MergePHP, but if you're interested, please contact us. Let us know if you're willing to help, or if there's something you want us to put on. We achieved those goals through in-person meetups, which we haven't done in a while, but hopefully we'll be able to do again in the next few months. Anyway, 6 months, year, whatever. We do virtual self-study groups, which are run by Gene Babin, who's my co-organizer. He basically he recruits some people to join, and then you basically pick a book that you'll all follow together, and then you have a schedule, and you do like a chapter a week or something like that, and then you post your exercises from the book in the group or the Boston PHP forums, and the group helps each other learn. And there's all different topics. There's PHP, I think JavaScript. Recently we've added Agile, so they're all across the board. There's a bunch of different topics, and you can go to our website to find out about it. And if you have questions or if you have a hard time finding anything, like just send me an email or something. I'd be happy to show you around. And then now virtual meetups. Thanks, COVID. So to contact us for the live events and general questions, you can contact me. You can contact us through Boston PHP, or you can go through the other groups that I showed you: Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. And for virtual self-study related things, contact Gene. And with that, I will hand it off to Logan.
All right, thanks, Bobby. I'm gonna attempt to do an intro here for Chris, since I'm sure we have some Atlanta PHP people here. All right, stop sharing here, and over here. Is this the right one? Yes. Okay. So Atlanta PHP is run by Chris. They are a long-running PHP user group there in Atlanta, and they're on Meetup. And then they also have a website that they work on. They've got a Google group, I believe, from memory serves me right. And then Chris always plugs the sponsors, so I feel like I should say something about the sponsors, but Variux and Shotproof, and you can see their other sponsors here on their website. So definitely check out atlantaphp.org. I'm sorry, Chris, if that was a really bad intro. If you're watching this video later, I did my best. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Austin PHP. So we're the longest running tech group here in Austin. We've been around since 2002 as well. And we're trying to save the elephants, fighting the good fight. We used to do 2 meetings a month, a learning one and then a drinking social one. but now just the virtual meetups, and I really like the virtual meetups. So I'm planning on doing my best to keep this going. I know there's a lot of people that have used to live in Austin that moved away, and I think this is a good opportunity to connect with PHP developers spread out all over. So yeah, and then we started a PHP conference, or not started. We took over Dallas PHP's started a PHP conference. It ran for almost a decade. I don't remember how many, a long time. And then we they passed the torch over to us, and this is going to be the third year. But because of the virus, it's been, the 2020 has been postponed. I think everybody, all of our lives have been postponed in 2020. So we're definitely committed to doing an in-person event, and we're targeting spring. Ian will correct me if, yep, okay.
I can talk about that a little bit. So at this point, so previously we had the Longhorn PHP 2020 conference scheduled for October. So at this point in the past, we rescheduled it due to current events to May 8th or thereabouts. You can look on longhornphp.com for further details. Our plan is to do an in-person event once it's safe to do so. If that is May, then we'll keep our existing dates. If we do have to push it, then we'll let folks who have bought tickets and applied to speak and that sort of thing know. But at this point, May is about 6 months away. So we are optimistic that maybe we get a vaccine and that sort of thing between now and then, and we can actually have a wonderful in-person event with all y'all coming down. With that said, the CFP for that conference is currently open. At this point, there's about a month left in that CFP. Please submit talks if you have any interest in speaking. And as with our previous years of the conference, the speaker package includes being flown out to hear enough time at the conference venue, which this year is the Holiday Inn Midtown over near 290 and 35. Enough nights there to actually attend the entire or a large portion of the conference, and maybe see what there is to see at that point. Again, hopefully by then things will be a little bit more opened up. So CFP is open, submit to that. Tickets are available at blind bird pricing. So it's standard community conference pricing for an in-person event if you want to contribute to that. And likewise, sponsor slots are open as well. If you have further questions on that, you can, the contact information for us is on longhornphp.com, or you can reach out to me directly.
All right. Thanks, Ian. I wanted to pull up the CFP page because I know we've got a month left, but I want to, and also make sure that everybody caught that. Our speaker package is great. If you want a free flight to Austin and come have fun with a bunch of PHP people next May, submit a talk.
Yep. And the URL for that is cfp.longhornphp.com.
Yep. All right. Well, I think we're going to get started here. So I've known Ian for almost a decade now. Really smart developer. He obviously lives here in Austin as well. And his focus has been on APIs, I think, for the most part. But so always stay on top of technology. If you're interested at all in wireless and mobile phone technology, go talk to Ian. He knows a lot about that stuff. So um, he's definitely a fun person to get to know, and I value his contributions with the Austin PHP meetup. So he's given a number of talks in the past for us, and I know he's traveled a lot to a lot of other PHP conferences here in the US and then abroad as well. So he's definitely an accomplished speaker. And so I'm looking forward to his take on PHP 8 and the new features that are coming up here soon. So I'm gonna start recording the official video stuff. So I'm gonna swap over to the other slide and then we'll get started here in like 2 minutes.
Okay. Let me know when things are rolling in terms of recording, and then I will grab the screen share.
Yep. I suppose I should have like started the Zoom recording and then like done the intro, but
Meh.
yeah, okay.
People know who I am, maybe.
All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, we're recording. Welcome everyone to MergePHP November 2020. We've already done the intro, so I'm just gonna pass it over to Ian and we can get started.
Sounds good. Let me find the correct window here, or correct screen rather. Advanced, maybe. Okay. It looks like Catalina will only let me share windows rather than in an entire screen. So I will likely have to swap between screen shares as we go along, because I do want to at some point demo things. Although again, given the screen sharing issue, I'll likely actually hold on. Maybe I can just click on. No, I can't. Okay. We'll just share my presentation for the moment.
Sounds good.
And boom. All right. So, assuming you all can see my screen, we good?
Looks good.
Sweet. All right. So I am Ian Littman, and we're going to talk about PHP 8.0 today. So right now, PHP 8.0 isn't quite out, but it will be just 2 weeks from today. So release candidate 4 is already out. You can actually, let me back up for 1 second. The link to this presentation as I'm presenting it is en.im/php8merge. I have a ton of links in this presentation to the various features that I'm going over and that sort of thing, as well as information on how to download distributions of the binaries for PHP 8. So you may want to follow along here. Again, that link is en.im/php8merge. Now, as I was saying, PHP 8 comes out in 2 weeks. Release candidate 4 is out now. Thanks a ton to the release managers for PHP 8.0, Sarah Goldman and Gabriel Caruso, for their work in making sure that builds and such have been released as the various betas and release candidates have come out. So you can grab this now. Obviously, do not put this in production, and as a rule, I would say don't bother with pushing PHP 8 into production until, number one, you've checked over your existing code and made sure that it's compatible, and number two, you've waited for, say, 8.0.1 or maybe 8.0.2 patch releases to clean up things that the test suites and such have not caught. Now, with that said, you can absolutely pull this down, as I have, to your local machine to play around with things. Now, in this presentation, first off, we'll take a quick look at how to actually get this pre-release version of the next version of PHP. Once we've gone through that, we'll take a look at a bunch of new features and general enhancements to the language. Then we'll look at backward compatibility breaks, things that have been deprecated, removed, or just generally work differently than in 7.4 and previous versions. A lot of these changes did get deprecation notices in 7.4, but there are some BC breaks that you can't really do in a clean way on 7.4, so they're just kind of happening in PHP 8. Of course, it is a major version bump, so there's you can't really complain about the BC breaks that you're going to see. And as you'll see later in this presentation, those backward compatibility breaks are for pretty good reasons, actually. They kind of clean up some corners of the language and make things a bit more reliable. Lastly, I do have, in addition to links in the various slides, I pulled information for this presentation from a few different sources, Stitcher.io, PHP Watch, and actually earlier today, Wim Gotham did a, I'm sure I messed up that name, apologies, Wim, did a presentation earlier today at the PHP Benelux meetup, and I kind of compared notes and made sure that that I didn't miss anything that he had mentioned in that presentation. So there are multiple good resources on the new version of PHP, keeping in mind that there are a few things that even I noticed as I was putting together this presentation that are either incomplete or out of date with any single source. You kind of have to pull from multiple. So with that said, let's look at how to actually get this PHP runtime. So the way that I grabbed it for this presentation was via Homebrew. I'm running macOS, and there are nightly builds. So this is actually slightly further ahead of the release candidates, but for local development and that sort of thing, it's fine to grab this. So that's you tap the Shiva Mather Shiva and Mather /PHP cask, and then install from there. That is a pretty easy process. It'll take you a minute or two, assuming that your Homebrew install is up to date. And then you have PHP 800-dev, and then you can play around with these wonderful features. One thing that I do have to note here is that Composer is probably going to yell at you a whole ton because PHP 8 is actually a new version. Any of your caret-based dependencies, if anybody is actually depending on a certain version of the PHP runtime, that's going to break because now we're on 8.0. So 7.2 or above with a caret, that's not going to work anymore. So what you'll likely have to do if you're doing Composer updates and the like is use the --ignore --platform-rex flag and cross your fingers and hope that that the various libraries are indeed compatible with PHP 8, which chances are decent that they are, but it's something to keep in mind. There is a tool out there called PHP compatibility. It's GitHub PHP compatibility /PHP compatibility, I believe, that will allow you to actually look at either your code or others and catch cases where there are incompatibilities either with PHP 8 or earlier versions, but it's just something to keep in mind that when I was playing around with this actually earlier today, the when I tried to do a composer update to fix some other issues with like PHP parser and such, it complained about a whole bunch of platform requirements not being there. And then I said, just run it and ignore the fact that I'm running PHP 8.0, and everything worked fine. So with that said, not all of y'all are running on macOS. And for those of you running either a development environment locally or in a VM or whatever on Debian or Ubuntu-based Linux, it appears as though I missed the link there. There is an article on php.watch that actually guides you through the process of installing PHP 8 on Ubuntu or Debian-based distributions. Basically, the same thing that you would normally do with Andrej Suri's PHP PPA, you would do here and just specify, hey, I want PHP 8, and everything will work. So as with previous versions of PHP on Red Hat-based distributions, so Fedora and Red Hat Enterprise Linux and maybe Amazon Linux. I'm not sure how this all works with Amazon Linux 2 at this point. You can use the Remy repo, and he's got instructions at that link to pull PHP 8 down for that distribution. For running this in Docker, the standard kind of version and tagging conventions apply here. The PHP 8.0.0, RC4, FP, Alpine 3.12. If you're running a web server and firing requests back, then that would be your base image in all likelihood, and then drop the RC4 once a full release of PHP is out. But those are available directly on Docker Hub. Note that Docker does have a limit on how many times you can pull from it at this point as a free user. So in all likelihood, if you're running this through CI or something like that, you want to pull this image down and then push it to a repo under your control, maybe GitHub package registry or GitLab or Amazon Elastic Container Registry or Google's version of that. Just something to keep in mind, that if you're pulling this down a lot for CI, you probably don't want to use the free version of Docker Hub anymore. If you're running Windows, despite the fact that Microsoft has kind of said that they're not going to lend a whole lot of aid in keeping PHP up to date on the Windows side, there are builds available. I have not pulled those down, so go at your own risk there, but PHP 8 builds are available at the link in that bullet on this slide. And finally, if you're feeling adventurous, you can grab the source code for the for PHP 8 builds via that link at the bottom there, which links to the home directory of one of the release managers. So now that you've got the PHP 8 installed, what exactly is new about it? Well, first off, there is the much talked about feature of the just-in-time compiler. That is likely not going to matter to you. Reason being is, my guess is most people here are using PHP in the context of a short lifetime web request and response based system. And that you're not really doing something over and over and over again within the context of a request there. And you're not doing something that's terribly computationally intensive per request either. You're processing a request, and likely your bottleneck is not the application server, but it's the database or some external API or something like that. As a result, while PHP 8 is faster than previous versions, it's not actually because of the JIT, at least in standard use cases. My guess is and I haven't had a chance to test this out yet, but my guess is that if you have a longer running web server, such as AMP or Swool, where you're doing some fun async stuff there, that may be able to give you a performance increase at higher levels of load with the JIT enabled, because you'll actually have some code hot paths in there that are traversed over and over, are running in userland PHP, and can be optimized. But the bigger deal on a JIT is longer running processes, for example, command lines or basically anything that is actually compute intensive within the main thread rather than farming out the work to other services. That's going to get faster. If you're doing something over and over again, then the JIT can pick up on that, compile the code, as long as the types of arguments are consistent, and then you'll get a performance increase. As others have said, the benefit here is not so much existing PHP workloads, although in certain cases workloads will benefit. It's more of allowing PHP to be used for compute-intensive workloads that in previous versions of the runtime were just flat out too slow to deal with. You can play with the JIT on your own time, but again, keep those caveats in mind that on a production workload, the speed improvements elsewhere in PHP 8 are going to be the primary source of things being faster or taking less load, rather than the JIT itself, which I believe in the web context is actually turned off. So let's actually get into features that do result in your code looking a little bit different. First one, union types. This is useful when you have a number of classes that that you can't just say, oh, well, these all conform to the same interface, because maybe, as in this example, you're dealing with something that looks like a PDO instance or is the actual PDO. Maybe your PDO interface is lazy loaded and your actual PDO is not, and you want to be able to work with both because they actually do have the same methods. You can use union types for that, where you can OR various types across and say, yeah, this class has to be one of these particular types, whether that is a primitive type built into PHP or a class built into PHP or a class that you define yourself or an interface you define yourself. You can now specify that in a way that is actually type safe, where the PHP runtime will enforce that, rather than having to just throw up your hands and say, well, I can't specify a type here. One moment while I switch to do not disturb on my computer because I forgot to do that. Okay, so in this case, we have this query method and we're passing in a database instance from the outside. This works on both parameters and return types as highlighted here. So pretty useful, and it allows you to drastically reduce the number of cases where you just don't specify a type on a parameter or return. Next, we have the stringable interface. Now, all this does is and this is backward compatible, where anything that has _2 will actually conform to this interface, but it allows you to quickly, similar to what iterable has done with either traversable or arrays, stringable does with anything with a _2 string method. It says enforce that whatever object I'm passing in actually can be coerced to a string successfully. Now, one thing to note here is that the stringable interface does not actually include primitive strings. So, and that's actually a feature rather than a bug, because you can, as shown here, you can take a string or stringable and use algebraic types to accept both. If you just provided the stringable interface type hint here, then if you passed a raw string into the query, then you would get a type error back. Continuing in the vein of type-related stuff, you have the mixed type hint, which really all that's there for is kind of completeness, where you say it really could be anything. And no, I didn't just forget to add a type hint here. I really have to have this function either return or take as a parameter something that could be anything. It's required, but it could be anything, including null. So another fun and controversial one here is named parameters. Now, personally, as somebody who's written a library or two, this is kind of scary, because now you have another way in which your library can be rendered backward incompatible because you didn't necessarily provide a good parameter name to start with. But hey, for cases where you have a bunch of optional parameters, this name parameters setup where you can call any function within PHP via these via this syntax where it's parameter name : parameter value, means that you, instead of having these big dictionaries of untyped array or untyped array nonsense like the Amazon Web Services SDK does, you can actually have a whole ton of mostly optional parameters in your function signature, specify types for all of them, and then have the person using that library or that call provide effectively key value pairs to specify which parameters they actually want to switch from the defaults to in your function call. So in this case, taking that query method previously, we can specify parameters in any order. We can even start by specifying parameters positionally. So in that second function call there, you have your $PDO that's just going to slot right in as the first parameter. And then we flip things around and say, well, I want to specify params as the next parameter and then query as the third. So you have some level of flexibility here. Again, this does increase the burden for library maintainers if they want to seamlessly support backward compatibility, because now people are actually relying on the way that you named your parameters in all of your public function calls and really protected function calls as well. But again, it makes interfaces with a larger number of parameters actually kind of tenable, rather than having a function where you're calling it with true, false, null, 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 false, true, 1, 5, insert constant here. Next up, we have the null safe operator. Now, HHVM has had this for quite a while, or Hack has had this for quite a while, but the idea here, folks may call this the maybe monad, I believe, where you can specify that a function change should not break just because the result of one call is null. And this this null safe operator here is it will actually short circuit. So the way that this works, the way that this code works is you have this note repository that probably returns a note, but it might not. It might return null. You want to echo out the author name of that note if it exists, and null if it doesn't. in previous implementations, say PHP 7.4 or below, what you would have to do here is find a note by slug, check to see whether it's null, or have some sort of exception handling sort of deal where you always return a note or you throw an exception. But in this case, you would take the note, check if it's null, and then continue from there. Instead, this extra null safe operator allows you to basically short circuit at the point of, well, I got a null value back. Okay, well, now what do I do? Well, it's that question mark there added in means that if the left-hand side of that argument is null, then that operator will return null and not keep going down that chain. So the fact that I don't have that operator on author arrow name is fine because we don't even get that far. By contrast, if we actually do have a note, then that operator behaves just like a normal arrow operator would. If y'all want to see a demo of that, I'll actually do that, all of the questions and answers and demos at the end of this presentation. So kind of useful if you use the pattern of nullable objects and such everywhere rather than, say, throwing exceptions when objects aren't found. So next, let's take a look at match expressions. So I'm guessing most of y'all have written a switch statement, and probably most of y'all have missed a break or something in that switch statement and kind of gotten things wrong. And switch statements with those breaks and continues and such, for a lot of use cases, they're kind of ugly and hard to read. Well, that's where the match expression comes in, where you can specify effectively an array of options to match against, and they are exact matches. There are a few things that you can do with expressions in the left-hand side, but realistically, what you'll see is something like the right-hand side of this slide, where you're matching against the return value of whatever is in that match parameter at the top here. And you're doing an exact match on the value, and then immediately returning either some sort of expression, whether that's a string, whether that's a result of a function, and then you have your default option here as well. One thing to note here is if there is no match and you don't have a default, then this actually will throw a typed error saying, hey, you coded something up wrong. But as it stands, this way you can quickly specify single line expressions saying if the result of either this parameter or this function call is exactly one thing, which is a really common use case for switch statements, then you can return a value directly and not have to worry about assigning things over and over again, or explicitly calling break or something like that. And additionally, you can map multiple cases of a match statement to a single branch here. So this is something that I see myself using pretty much immediately as soon as I'm comfortable using PHP 8 in production, because the switch statements are ugly enough, even though they're pretty performant, they're ugly enough that I tend to shy away from them and just do if, else, if, so that I don't get the break logic wrong. And this fixes that issue. So another cool thing, we have a class constructor property promotion. So other languages like C# have this, where you can implicitly declare properties inside a constructor and immediately assign variables from the constructor parameters into those properties. This lightweight constructor thing where you're just assigning a whole bunch of parameters to properties is a super common pattern, and this drastically cleans up that pattern. Now, this does not preclude you from doing logic within your constructor. In fact, after the way that this works is the first thing that constructor property promotion does is it'll assign your parameters to properties right off the bat. That means that effectively you can treat the rest of the actual body of your constructor as if you had, in this case, 2 lines of assigns at the top of it. So I can actually use the newly assigned properties right here in the constructor if I want to. So one thing to note here is defaulting still works here, just like it does when either assigning a property or specifying constructor parameters. The one thing you don't want to do, because it will give you a compile time error, is actually specifying these properties both here in the constructor as well as in properties in the normal place on your class. So let's build on this with attributes. This is the one thing where I actually had to go to a different source than PHP Watch because the syntax for attributes changed a few times. And they eventually settled on this format, which is actually backward compatible because, yeah, that £, that's a single line comment. So the cool thing is you can add attributes to your code now, and they'll be backward compatible with older versions of PHP. Of course, the attribute behaviors may not be, but this is a way to provide semantically significant documentation or decoration to a class and kind of hook things in, or a class or a property or a function or even a parameter name. I believe that that gets you something that is easier to use than the existing doc block based system. So in this case, what we do is to declare an attribute, we use this attribute to say, hey, go ahead and load this class up as an attribute type, and we're going to use it later. Then down here, this sets constructor parameters for that attribute class. And again, you can assign these attributes to a class or a property or a method or a variable. From there, you can use the PHP Reflection API to go in, find your methods or classes or properties, and then grab the attribute from them and then instantiate a new instance of that attribute. And at that point, in this case, you get back, when you run that code, a DB column class with name of name and nullable of false, as you would expect. So another cool thing is if you are catching exceptions and those exceptions are typed anyway such that you don't actually need the exception object itself to figure out what to do next, then you now no longer have to provide it. You can catch an exception by type and then move on with your life and not even assign or allocate memory for that exception variable. Getting into kind of the miscellaneous new things in PHP 8, we have a whole bunch of new functions here. Float division, where will return positive or negative infinity rather than false or such when you divide by 0. Eventually, your standard division method will throw when you divide by 0, but that's going to be a release or 2 in the future, or 3 releases in the future. Get debug type, if you've ever used the get type method and then tried to shove things into say type int and realize that that doesn't actually work, get debug type actually fixes that with a new function that will give you, if you provide a, say, an integer or a float in there, then it will give you int or float as the names rather than something that you can't use as a type int. Then you've got string contains, starts with, and ends with as convenience methods so that you don't wind up in a case where you have to do a strict equality comparison with strpos for the 590th time, so that you don't confuse having a substring be at the beginning of a string with a substring not being in the string at all. If you've used the preg methods and actually checked for errors on that, that method will return false, just like JSON decode will if you don't provide the extra parameter to tell it to throw exceptions. And it'll return false, and then you can get an error code with preg last error. Well, in this case, you can get a friendlier description of the error by doing preg last error message. Then there's get resource ID, which just returns the integer ID of a resource. However, as we're going to see in a minute, that's going to be used a lot less than you would think. And datetime, immutable, and datetime. Previously, you had create from immutable or create from mutable, depending on which class you were looking at. The create from interface method actually works on both instances of the class, so you can more easily convert from mutable or immutable and not have to have some branching logic in there of, oh, well, is this immutable? Then I need to create from immutable. And this kind of just cleans that up and removes one more ternary in your code for dealing with date times. Speaking of date times, the lowercase p time zone offset fixes one issue that's not really a huge deal, but I think that's probably supposed to be 00:00, but usually you'll see timestamps in UTC use Z as your time zone offset rather than plus 0000. Previously, you kind of had to hand do that in PHP. In this case, if you specify that lowercase p format parameter, then it'll just do that automatically. Additionally, there are some changes to printf where now, and these are new additions, they don't change existing behavior, where you can have finer grained control over the width of a formatted number, as well as ensure that if you output a float, that it will always use a dot as the decimal separator rather than behaving according to your locale, which in some locales, instead of a dot between the decimal component and the whole component of the number, you end up with a comma, and that's kind of unexpected. Few more things here. You can now instantiate the PHP built-in web server with port 0, and it will ask the OS, hey, what is the, give me an unused port, and the OS will say, well, this one, and then the PHP built-in web server will start on that port. So that allows you to have a guaranteed start on the PHP web server at some random port, rather than potentially having a port conflict. You can also change the so by default, arguments in a get traces string for an exception will, they'll cut off at 15 characters. You can now actually configure that. JSON in the past was a PHP extension that you might have, you might not. As of PHP 8, it is always built in. And you can now throw exceptions anywhere that you can have an expression. So if you wanted to use like a short lambda syntax for functions and just throw an exception there rather than returning and not have to build an entire callable with a longer syntax, you can now do that. If you disable functions for security reasons, previously, if you tried to call one, it would throw a warning and explain this has been disabled for security reasons. With this change, those functions aren't even pulled into the function table to start with, which means that if you wanted to, you could override those entirely, and it just behaves as if disabled functions don't even exist at all. If you like using the _ class operator everywhere you have an opportunity to, you'll be glad to see that in PHP 8, you can now use _ class on an instance of an object to figure out which class it is, rather than having to use the get underscore class global function. So there are a number of places where I'm looking forward to cleaning up code that currently uses get underscore class. And lastly, private functions. There's no point in declaring a private function final, except for constructors. But for previous versions of PHP, it would behave as if, oh, it's a private final method. Well, it's final. I can't let you override this, even though you don't even know that the method exists. PHP 8 fixes that again. The exception here is private final constructors, where you really, really, really don't want somebody overriding your constructor. Those will still error out here if you try to override them, but for everything else, if you say private final on a method, then it's just going to warn you and say, look, this doesn't make any sense. We're going to let folks override this because they don't even know that your private method exists. So with that said, let's jump into BC breaks here. First off, there is now this concept of a value error, where if you provide some crazy offset into various string offset functions and such, or like strpos, instead of returning false and giving you a warning, it will throw a value error, which you can then catch and decide what to do with. This is part of a larger trend in core that switches a lot of return false and warn methods over to throwing engine errors or exceptions, so that you can more properly catch them and hopefully have some less buggy code. With that said, this does mean that if you have some subtle bugs in your code, all of a sudden you'll see exceptions come across that you hadn't seen before, and probably get 500s out of them. So something to note when you're porting things over. Again, strpos is not the only case where this is happening, and there are a number of cases where internal functions will now throw where they previously warned, and we'll get into a little bit more of that in a minute. String concatenation. So in terms of lovely brain teasers, if you looked at this echo statement, you would think, okay, well, 5 + 3 is 8. Easy enough, right? The string concatenation operator has a low level of precedence, and it'll just work, right? Yeah, no. Previous versions of PHP, the string concatenation operator had a high enough precedence that you would end up with concatenating a number to a string and then adding that to 3, and then you end up with a weird thing. And then you wind up putting parentheses everywhere because the system doesn't work in a way that is reasonable. So that's fixed in PHP 8. So now And there was a deprecation notice on this in PHP 7.4, but now when you concatenate to the result of addition or subtraction is high enough precedence that the math operation will go first, and then the string concatenation operation will go second, and your string concatenation will actually behave as expected, assuming that's what you meant to do. This is a BC break, but it's a BC break in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. So there, like I said earlier, the number of resources that you'll be dealing with in PHP 8 is significantly smaller than in previous versions of the language, because your curl handles, your GD resources, and your socket resources, which we're not talking about streams here, we're actually talking about socket resources. Streams are still their own little mess. Those are now class instances rather than just random resources, which means you can now do instance of on them. They now return false if you ask if they're resources. And this is generally better overall, but it's something to keep in mind that if you were checking to see whether a curl thing is a resource, yeah, that no longer works. So in terms of class-related stuff, you have a few instances in PHP 7.4 and before where the runtime wasn't necessarily enforcing all of the constraints that it should have enforced in terms of interface segregation principle, or let's call it substitution, one of the two, such that you could either with an abstract method on a trait, or even subclasses on extended class, you could wind up with incompatible type signatures that would still actually, PHP would still let them write on through. Yeah, that's being cleaned up in PHP 8, such that now when you have incompatible signatures, then it will actually throw you an error and say, look, fix this, that these aren't the same things. Another thing to note here is that while you're fixing those, you probably want to name your parameters the same, because, well, named parameters are now a thing. Speaking of types, in signature enforcement, magic method signatures, the runtime will actually start yelling at you if you declare a magic method in a way that the types don't match what it's supposed to be. Likewise, static calls to non-static methods will now just flat out fail rather than complaining and then maybe going right along through. And now that we actually have enough language to describe optional parameters and nullables and that sort of thing with types, optional parameters followed by required parameters, which basically you would only use for cases that you're like talking about nulls. Those are now deprecated. Now you might think, well, how does this interplay with name parameters? Like, well, with positional parameters, which are still going to be primarily the way that you interact with PHP code, those optional parameters really should be last, even if somebody is just using name parameters the entire time anyway. And there are a few components on reflection that are deprecated, various more specific methods that return Booleans that have been superseded by the reflection get type method. And going back to what I said about disabled functions not being loaded even into the symbol table, the is disabled reflection method for global functions, that doesn't really do a whole lot of good at this point because the runtime doesn't even know that those disabled functions exist. So that's been deprecated because it's not really useful. Around throwing things and logging things, if you use the assert global function in PHP, previously it would warn by default. Now it throws exceptions by default. You can switch that back within any setting. PDO does the thing that it should have done in the first place, which is throw exceptions by default. In all likelihood, if you're using some framework, they've already done this setting for you where it's error mode exception by default, but now that is the default. If you want your database engine to fail silently on you and return false, and then you have to figure out what went on, you now have to specify that manually. PHP startup errors, the things that make you go scratch your head and wonder about the meaning of life, those are now displayed by default. You can turn that back off, but realistically, if you have PHP startup errors due to like an extension failing or something like that, you really want to see those errors so you can actually fix them. Additionally, PHP is now by default noisier on errors. You can drop those errors back out so it's not complaining at you about deprecated and I think notices, but by default, it's now going to tell you if there are any issues whatsoever in your code. And fatal errors, previously, well, fatal errors were fatal. You could use the @ operator or the silence operator to say, yes, I know this is going to destroy my application, but don't actually log that error, don't actually display that error. In this case, that no longer works. If you have something that fatals, then you will get that in logs, even if you try to do a silence. And speaking of errors, warnings and errors and things have been moved around such that, as a rule, issues that PHP would complain about less, it's going to be a bit louder about, to kind of move in the direction of saying, look, we want to make sure that your code runs as properly as it possibly can. We don't want you to have random bugs in your code because you overlooked some edge case. We're going to be a bit more forward about telling you when those things pop up. So that link actually goes to the RFC where a whole bunch of these things were reclassified. If you have logging on in your existing system and you're logging at the notice level anyway, and striving for zero notice code, then and actually succeeding in that, then you really don't have anything to worry about here. However, if you're currently just saying, oh, well, I have a whole bunch of notices and I don't care about notices, that's going to become a problem when you upgrade to PHP 8, because those notices will turn into warnings, or warnings will turn into errors, and you'll have to deal with them. Finally, a few odds and ends here. The crypt function will now require a salt to be provided. Please use random bytes for that. Substring and a few other methods will now consistently return an empty string rather than potentially false when you're dealing with stuff out of bounds. You can see more info on that link. And if you cast a string as a float, it will always use a dot for the decimal point. It will no longer be locale dependent, where sometimes it uses a comma. So with that, that is the whirlwind tour through both new features. There are a few other new features in PHP 8 that I did not mention. Those are mentioned in either the Stitcher link that I have here, or PHP Watch is also a good resource for this. I largely pulled from those two in order to make this presentation, as well as the presentation that happened earlier today of PHP Benelux, where Damien Segui and Wim both kind of did a double header there of talking about getting your code ready for PHP 8 and kind of seeing what new features are there. So definitely check all of these 3 resources out to increase your knowledge on PHP 8. Again, you can download this right now, play around with it locally. Again, wait for a patch or two before you deploy it in production. But we've got just about 2 weeks before this goes gold, and I'm certainly excited about the new things that are being brought in. With that, thank you for paying attention on this presentation. I am Ian Littman. You can find me on Twitter as shown on screen here. And you can find these slides at ian.im/php8merge. Again, there are a ton of links here. I will fix that one link early on about the Ubuntu install, and I actually saw one other typo that I repeated a word in here. I'll fix those, and that'll be reflected in these slides. And yeah, thanks to everyone for your virtual attendance. With that, I'm going to double check the Q&A, which it looks like there's no Q&A at this point. I'm checking the YouTube chat now to see if there is anything of interest there. But yeah, I'll open it up to questions. And if y'all want me to demo some feature or functionality that I had mentioned earlier in this presentation, I can go ahead and reshare over to a terminal and play around with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian, for the talk. I had a question or maybe a request. I'll put it that way. The JIT, adding in the JIT is a pretty big thing. Maybe it would be helpful if we could have maybe like a refresher on what the JIT, how that works and how it's different than opcode caching.
So opcode caching, you're not compiling things down into machine code at that point. You still have a runtime layer that sits between even those opcodes and the hardware of your machine. That allows for things like the type juggling that goes on and that sort of thing. By contrast, a JIT, which stands for just-in-time compiler, actually compiles certain portions of your code, and you can specify at what level the JIT should operate. There are any file parameters for that. It will actually compile that function all the way down into machine code, which is going to be a lot faster than running in interpreted mode. Again, opcache is obviously a huge performance benefit versus just parsing the file every time, but it doesn't get all the way down to the metal, which JITted code does. Now, the catch with that, of course, is that the just-in-time compilation process makes that code a bit more specific in terms of inputs and outputs. Now, it's handled transparently, but there are cases, and I'm going based on what I read early on the HHPM JIT. So the PHP implementation, which I believe is based on Lua JIT, may operate a little bit differently, but you generally have guards to say, okay, am I looking at the exact same parameter and return types here? Or actually, yeah, just parameter types, sorry, for a method. And if I'm not looking at the exact same ones, then you have to bail out and just run in interpreted mode because your underlying compiled code doesn't conform to the parameters that you're actually putting in there. So you have that kind of bailout process there, and you have the fact that the compilation process to get things into a more performant state does take some amount of time. And as a result, it doesn't, there is a trade-off performance-wise where you don't want to just-in-time compile your entire application.
Like I think I've heard, when Hack came out, or I think you gave a talk, or maybe we were kind of going over the differences between the Facebook, fork and there was some talk, if I remember right, where you would have to like warm up the code. Like, is that now a thing
So
for if you have a route or something that is like really heavily used, like should you warm it up um, before deploying it?
So to my, and I'm 90% sure on this, but I believe that the JIT is turned off by default in PHP 8 for the web SAPI, because there is a performance penalty as you're warming things up, and on a rarely used code path, you never get that back. So you don't suddenly have to think about warming up, immediately upgrade to PHP 8 and then have to think about warming up your entire system because the JIT's turned off by default.
Okay.
If you turn the JIT on in a web context, which again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do, then at that point, you want to run through your warmer code paths and get that JITted code in PHP's just-in-time compilation cache, so it can refer to those tracelets later. But again, the JIT side of things makes a whole lot more sense in a more long-running context or more compute-intensive context. So the JIT is a lot more useful for
jobs and
yeah,
that sort of stuff.
yep.
Well, cool. I'll hopefully Taylor, Laravel, we'll see some of those features kind of start creeping into some of the frameworks and whatnot. Certainly a lot of the other things that are coming in the language, I could see being beneficial for framework builders. Looks like we have a a question on Zoom here. UTF-8 was sort of the same story as PHP 7. Could you talk a little bit about character sets in PHP in general?
UTF-8 support was not a focus for this rev. You're basically looking at PHP 7 in terms of how you deal with character sets. I am not the right person to ask for that. There are plenty of other presentations. For example, Andreas Heigl, my guess is the presentation that he did around UTF-8 back at PHP Bulgaria last year is available online somewhere. There are a few others who have done similar presentations. I'm not the right person to ask about character sets because I'm in the US, and that doesn't come up as often here.
Awesome.
But no, it's basically the same as it was previously.
Any other questions for Ian? I think Catherine wanted to see. Do you see on YouTube a
Yep.
demonstration of the matrix expressions?
Sure. Let me go back to that slide, and I can actually just copy paste this code. One moment while I switch which window I'm sharing, and do that, do this, do that. All right, so let's go here, and so we don't have this get route thing. Let's go ahead and define that. Let's do this. And let's set this as home. Let's set this as that, and let's rerun this. Boom. Okay, so in this case, it looks like I don't, oh, I know what I did. Okay, so let's do this. So we go there, or we match against, say, profile. So that's what match does. In this case, it took this branch, and only because of that branch, it executed that expression on the right-hand side there. So it's executing get route once, and then matching against everything here. And once it finds a match, which again, there are two possible matches here, one here, and then if there's nothing found, then we go here. Then it executes the right-hand side of whatever matches, and that has to be similar to what happens with short closures. You get one expression there, you cannot do multiple lines here. But realistically, the use case of match is such that if you want to do multiple lines, then you either do a function call or you switch back to a switch statement.
Yeah, it seems super helpful, and it's a lot easier to read than very long case statements.
Again, I'm looking forward to once PHP 8 is a patch release or two in, going through and cleaning up a number of case statements with this construct.
Does default have to be at the end, or can it be anywhere? Like, does position matter?
I don't know. Let's find out. So
My gut says it has to be at the end.
no, so let's see here. That is so no, you can put it anywhere. It's effectively just like an array side of things where default always gets matched last.
Cool. Well, that's good. Figuring stuff out on the fly.
So as far as whether it requires a default or not, you don't actually need a default. If I do this and drop this out, then you get unhandled match value here, and that is an error. I forget. Let's try this again. Okay, so I forget what the method in SciSH is to figure out what the class of the exception that's thrown is, but actually, we can do this. Try that catch. There we go. Okay, it's unhandled match error. So you can provide something without without a default, just like you can on a switch statement. But unlike a switch statement, if you find something that's not a match and there is no default, then it will yell at you about it and say, look, either you provide a default there or don't provide any random input.
Seems like that makes sense. With all this new exceptions are going to be thrown, it seems like we should probably do a talk at some point on like the different options that people have for logging, exceptions and errors and stuff in the cloud. It's been a while since we've done a similar sort of talk. I know there's a handful of them. I did see that Spotty, the or maybe it's not, it's like a joint venture or something. There's a new one that I found the other day that looks interesting, and so
So
yeah.
the question is it better than Sentry? If so, why?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if that's enough for a full talk, but like, I just thought of that like while we were talking about exceptions and all this stuff.
I mean, we could have lightning talks next month or something, and
yeah, that's a good idea. I could do a smaller, quicker talk.
Yeah,
I was going to suggest the same thing. If we can get like 3 small 5 to 15-minute talks, that's something we've done in the past that works really well.
Yeah.
By the way, Gene posted in the chat and in the Q&A section an FYI for everyone. The next Boston PHP meetup it's called HTML5 Brunch Season 12. I can't believe we're up to Season 12 already. But it's a virtual self-study group where you can learn HTML5 at your own pace over a series of weeks or months. Anyone's welcome to join. You can just go to meetup.com/BostonPHP, and there'll be just sign up for the group, and there'll be an event on the events page for HTML5 Brunch, and all the information will be there. And you can always contact Gene or myself if you have any questions.
Cool. Thanks for putting that together, Gene. That will definitely be helpful for people and even people that you're like, oh, I know HTML5. There's a lot of properties that you're like, you may need a refresher. So I think that'll be good for everyone of all skill sets.
Yeah. Cool. Last call for questions. Now that I've closed the Q&A window, so somebody else will have to tell me if another question comes in. I'm just watching the YouTube chat.
Oh, yeah.
But
it's like everybody's saying thanks for the presentation.
Yep.
Ian, that was good presentation on PHP 8. You said is it the November 20 something, like 21st?
November 26th is the expected release date. So again, 2 weeks. Cool. I guess that's Thanksgiving Day.
Well, it's there's going to be interesting Thanksgiving
Well,
this year.
Yeah, and it's like PHP 7.4 was released, I think, on Thanksgiving Day as well, or basically then. So
Is it like the third Thursday or something, or like is it a date, or is it like a day of the month?
It got moved around to match with other like 7.4.13, I think, is being released then, and a few other things. I think it's just that the release cadences for the other like 7.4 and 7.3 happened to line up. It's like, okay, let's just move this a week earlier. It was originally going to be a Thursday later, and it just got moved up.
Probably the biggest thing for a lot of people that are on Mac, it would be like, be careful running the like brew update after Thanksgiving, because like homebrew is like been known to just like, and now you're running the latest thing.
I mean, that sounds like a perfect way to jump headfirst into PHP 8. As long as you're not running your Mac with brew in production, I don't see an issue. Everybody's running all of their production instances Dockerized anyway, so your production isn't going to change, and you can run your local as if it were
you want.
I don't see what the issue is.
True. Maybe not a huge issue. Yeah.
Is there a migration tool for PHP 8?
PHP compatibility is the tool that I have used with great success for migrating various code bases, including one that was built like PHP 5.2 era, if not earlier. And I got that one all the way up to like 7.2 relatively recently. My personal plan for PHP 8 upgrades across the various projects that I work on, for ones that there's a fair amount of code involved, is I will be running those through the PHP compatibility check, which is based on PHP Code Sniffer, and just saying, hey, my target is PHP 8. Tell me what the issues are, and then go through and fix those issues. That's worked well for me in the past, and that's what I'll be doing this time.
Does PHP compatibility checker have an option to fix your code, or it warns you of your incompatible code and then you fix it manually?
So I don't know what so there are certain profiles where there is like PHP Code Sniffer and PHP CS Fixer that will fix stuff, but I believe that's all like linting related stuff. I don't believe that, like, the compatibility tools that I have used in the past do not, they don't change your code. They don't do an upgrade. That said, I think Rector might, but I have not used Rector. I'll defer to somebody who has.
I've not heard that one yet either.
I actually need to go look into that. Thanks for reminding me.
I was checking to see like if the current when PHP Storm will support PHP 8.
It already does.
It does? Okay.
Yeah, it already supports PHP 8. Either it does in the release version or it does in the EAP. I'm not completely sure which one, but it definitely does support PHP 8 at this point.
Okay. Cool.
The nice thing about having a well-defined release schedule and having Nikita actually working for JetBrains is never behind on this stuff.
Yeah. They're on top of it. Yep. It's good to have a well-maintained good tool that follows the language. So
yeah.
We'll have to start giving away licenses. Maybe we get that started again. Keep forgetting to follow up on that. But yeah, well, thanks, Ian. Unless anyone has anything else, I think it was a good November. I hope everybody has a good Thanksgiving. You know, maybe we might have to do Thanksgiving over Zoom for for a lot of people, but yeah, we'll get through this. So definitely keep an eye out for something happening in December, since that was I think there'll be plenty of time before the holidays, and it's always good to get together and talk about stuff that's new in the industry. So yep, hope everyone's doing well, and we'll see you all next month.
Sounds good. Bye.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, everybody.